Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Marvel Age number 104, cover dated September 1991. So this came out in the summer of 1991 before the launch of X-Men number 1, adjectiveless X-Men number 1. And this issue is focused on X-Men and in particular contains a Jim Lee interview, profile, and some unpublished art, and this amazing Jim Lee cover as well. So this cover inked by Jim Lee, drawn and inked by him. Obviously you've got Psylocke there in the foreground. You've got Wolvie here over looking over Jim Lee's shoulder at the drawing he's doing of Psylocke, who looks a bit miffed. And we've got Gambit snickering at whatever effort Jim has made on his drawing table. So kind of a mixture of cartoon-ishness and also the realism that everybody loved Jim Lee for. I always like when Jim Lee is inking himself, and this looks great. But there's a few jokes going on here. So this is like his version of Homage Studios. We've got Will's Portaccio here having a snooze. We've got some notes here on the wall behind him. Will's Bob called Bob Harris, so on and so forth. He's obviously been snoozing a long time because some spiders have made some webs around him. We've got down here, we've got Scott Williams bonus Incurutus, feed at own risk, no loose pets. We've got a box of comics here, X-Men comics, Jim Lee's signature there. Wolvie drinking diet soda. It's 2:20 in the morning, so we've got this guy here bringing Jim some coffee and a camera, maybe with some reference photos. This guy must be some kind of gopher. I don't know who he is, but this up here I think is Carl Alstadter, and he was part of Homage Studios. In this era, did some penciling himself, but also an inker as well. And also the last little joke here in this cover is the fog pump. So we've got the obscuring of Psylocke's feet here, and we've got here a little kind of no feet sign, and also right on the side of it, Mignola tested, because that is where Lee got this basic kind of device, the fog that obscures the legs. And we'll see who Jim Lee's influences are inside this issue. So I'm going to open this one up, and this is intriguing because you have got here on the credits page basically a breakdown of everyone involved in Marvel Comics at the time, all of the major corporate people, as well as the editors, as well as the manufacturing coordinator. We've got, who else have we got here? We've got traffic production manager, Virginia Romita. That's John Romita Jr.'s mother, John Romita Sr.'s wife. Jack Abel, a proofreader. Imagine, like, they had a proofreader at the time as well. So everybody's here, it's all laid out. And basically, if you were someone in 1991 that made a pilgrimage to Marvel Comics on Park Avenue when they were at 387 Park Avenue, and you went into the building, these would be some of the people that you would have met there. So I'm not going to go through every item in this particular issue. I have things I want to focus on, primarily the Jim Lee stuff and the X-Men related stuff. But I'm going to go through it in such a fashion that you can pause the video, like you can pause it now, and you can read these different articles. So we've got something here about Marvel Masterworks. We have got we've got news here about what's coming up creatively from Marvel Comics. We've got a nice little spot image here of Impossible Man and Silver Surfer when Silver Surfer was drawn by Ron Lim. But it's also with Jim Valentino, and it's inked by Joseph Rubinstein. We've got a Mark Teixeira Ghost Rider here when he was drawing Ghost Rider and inking it too. Let's have a look. What's this here? Top 10 selling titles. Okay, so in 1991, Spider-Man number 10, McFarlane's Spider-Man Uncanny X-Men 276. Deadly Foes of Spider-Man #1, Amazing Spider-Man #347, that would have been drawn by Eric Larson. Ghost Rider 13, Mark Teixeira. Punisher War Journal 30, I don't know who was drawing that at the time. X Factor 66, that's Whilce Portacio. Marvel Comics Presents 76, that's Weapon X. Darkhawk #3, I don't know who drew that. Marvel Comics Presents 75, Weapon X again. So pretty cool that. Little feature here about Marvel and the movies. And then we've got a Marvel trivia quiz concerning the X-Men. Some of these questions are a little bit difficult. Like, who knows the answer to this one? The X-Men first met Lorna Dane in a conflict with the Hemi-Men, the Semi-Men, the Demi-Men. You know? Or here's another one. Plasma stole power from Havoc with the assistance of the Purifiers, the Trackers, the Seekers, the Plasmatics. Okay, so pause the video and take a look and see how you do on this particular trivia quiz. Now here we go. Here's the meat of this thing, the interview with Jim Lee. So we've got a nice little spot illustration of Wolverine here on guard with his claws popped in the brown and orange costume. Looking pretty vicious there. So we've got Jim Lee and it's inked by Scott Williams. Pretty cool. And let's have a little read of this. This interview is by Peter Sanderson. So let's have a look-see. And this is all by way of promoting Adjectiveless X-Men #1. So Jim Lee has become one of the hottest, most popular comic book artists of the early 1990s, having begun his career at Marvel on Alpha Flight and later the Punisher War Journal. Jim finally achieved his present high level of popularity as penciler of Marvel's perennial favourite, The Uncanny X-Men. Recently, a portfolio of Jim's Marvel covers has been released to the direct sales market. I never got my hands on that. But the big news is that Jim is the artist on Marvel's brand new X series titled simply enough X-Men, scripted as always by Chris Claremont, only until issue 3, inked by Scott Williams and edited by Bob Harris. Jim has come a long way in the 5 years he has been in the comics business. He had been a comics fan when he was growing up. Jim recalls, quote, "The stuff I was reading when I was in high school that I really loved was the X-Men by Chris Claremont and John Byrne and Daredevil by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson. Those are the two comics that I really collected, avidly for the story and art. I would say John influenced me a great deal. I was a big Neil Adams fan too, because I thought his stuff on the X-Men from the late 60s looked great." Jim gave up reading comics for a while, only to return to it in his senior year in college. By that time, Frank Miller was doing Dark Knight, so that's 1986. Did I just make sure, try and put that down for you. A friend of mine showed me that, and I was just astounded. It was gorgeous. That really got me back into comics. I found out that he and David Mazzucchelli had done some more Daredevils, and I picked those up, and I really liked the artwork on that. So David Mazzucchelli was an influence. Klaus Janson, Howard Chaykin, Kevin Nolan, Mike Mignola, pretty much everyone and anybody. And I think we can agree that around this time you can see those influences in Lee's work in the late 80s, early 90s, pre-Image. And then more from Lee himself. By June of 1986, Jim recalls, "I just graduated from college and I was interested in pursuing a career in commercial or fine art or something like that." End quote. He decided to try to get into the comics business. Quote, "I was sending submissions to a lot of companies, getting a lot of rejection letters, but I was drawing about a page and a half a day, and I was improving a lot month to month. By that November, he was feeling confident about his level of proficiency and decided to attend a Thanksgiving weekend comics convention in New York City that he'd read about in Cloak and Dagger. Quote, "I knew nothing about conventions, never having been to one before. I was looking to get work from anybody really, and I had a story, a sort of techno-thriller type of story that I'd drawn up. I took it there with me and I showed it to a lot of different companies, and no one really was interested except for Archie Goodwin from Marvel. He said, this looks great. Come on into the offices and see what we can do for you. I went in Monday and Archie showed the work around to give you a tryout story. So it was that Jim ended up working on issues of Alpha Flight for Carl. That's Carl Potts. And I think he starts with issue 51 of Alpha Flight. As a fan of John Byrne's, Jim was excited about getting to draw a team that John had created. Quote, but then when they sent me the plot, Bill Mantlo had decided with that first issue, the whole team was different. So I think I only ended up drawing one character of John, Sasquatch, and the rest I'd never seen before. I was kind of let down, but it was my first job. I was happy to get it. Thank God it wasn't a new universe book. Okay, and so Sanderson continues, in working on Alpha Flight, Jim was still learning his craft. Quote, I was really struggling just to make the work come out on time, figure out how to tell stories, my drawing, learning how to do more interesting layouts, that kind of thing. A lot of the real basic stuff that I think artists need to know. And I'm going to review Jim's first few Alpha Flight issues in upcoming videos, so stay tuned for that. Now back to the interview. Eventually Jim started drawing one of Marvel's most popular solo characters. Quote, I remember Carl, who ended up writing the Punisher's War Journal, had noticed that on the back of my pages, every now and then I drew little pictures of characters I'd like to draw. And one of them was the Punisher. I think the original art team he was going to go with had fallen through, and he said, are you interested in doing the Punisher? And I said, sure. It was something I wanted to do because it's different. It's a different genre within comics. It's the darker, grittier, more realistic kind of comic book. There's a lot of shadows, a lot of hardware, a lot of realistic looking buildings, which is a little different from what I was doing in Alpha Flight, which had people jumping from dimension to dimension and all these crystal monsters. Still, Jim goes on, quote, I think after doing 16 issues of The Punisher, I got kind of burnt out on the realistic stuff because there is a great deal of reference and research that has to be done. And in terms of creativity, how many times can you show the Punisher driving in his van in a different dramatic fashion? That's a fair point. So Jim was happy to switch over to the Uncanny X-Men, a very different kind of assignment. Working on X-Men now, he says, it's a whole new ball game. I've got to create some villains, some aliens and gadgets and different technologies for different races. It's more demanding, but at the same time, I think it's more challenging. It's more interesting, end quote. Of course, having been a long-time X-Men fan also makes working on these characters exciting for Jim. Quote, that's why I feel fairly confident I'll be on this new book for a while, because not only do I have the challenges of the book, the fact that it can go anywhere, outer space, inner space, whatever, I also have that feeling of nostalgia when I draw it. It's like, oh, this is that character that I used to really like. I get a kick out of that. Jim feels it has taken him different amounts of time to find the look he wants for the various members of the X-Men cast. Quote, I find that with some characters right off the bat, I can go, well, this would be cool if we did it this way. However, in the case of other characters like Storm, Jim points out, quote, you look at my first several issues, the faces of different characters change when I just tried to find the look for them to have. I'm starting to get a handle on it now. It's starting to gel for me. I feel pretty comfortable with Wolverine, Psylocke, Jubilee, Storm because I draw them a lot more. I still haven't got a handle on Forge yet or Banshee. I'm working on that. Recent issues of Uncanny X-Men have given him lots of opportunities to draw Rogue. Quote, but if you look at the first Rogue issue I did and the third, it's fairly different in terms of the kind of ciphers I use for the nose and mouth, he says. And I'm also trying to figure out exactly what age these people are. I especially want to get to the point where every time I draw Rogue, it's fairly consistent, and it's starting to get to that point now. The 9th or 10th issue in a row that I'm doing, I'm starting to develop that consistency. So we see Jim Lee really thinking about his craft here, thinking about how to make the characters consistent looking, very professional. And so back to the interview. Jim sees himself as taking a cinematic approach to drawing comics. Quote, when I read the plot, Chris does very detailed plots. If I can imagine it, if I can see it in my head, it's very easy for me to put it down on paper. End quote. With the recent Savage Land storyline with Rogue and Magneto in Uncanny X-Men, Jim says, quote, it's like I was running reels in my head and I could just see everything going, and I just kind of stopped and said, okay, I'll draw that shot. In terms of the actual shots I use, they're fairly basic. There are a lot of different things you can do with angles to create drama, to create emotion, other than what you draw within that panel, end quote. Asked how he thinks his work has changed since he first came to Marvel, Jim replies, I really can't tell my point of view as much. I really don't approach it in a different way. But I think every artist, especially the real young ones, when they draw their stuff, they think it looks great. They're blind to their mistakes. Although I pick up on it after I draw something, 3 months later I look back on it and I see the mistakes when I'm doing it. I always feel this is the best work I can do at the time. Looking back on my issues, I can tell, of course, I've been improving. But as I'm doing the work, I can't tell. What I'm trying to do now is exaggerate more, play around with proportions a little bit, and really work on visual expressions. And that's real important too. This is interesting, and you can tell that at this time, that is exactly what he was doing in his art. And each of the two X-Men books, the new one and Uncanny, Sanderson writes, will focus on a different team of X-Men, although both teams will be supervised by Professor Xavier. I think I'd like to have him play a more active role, Jim says. He should be like Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation. He doesn't go out into the field, but he's the leader behind the team. And ironic, of course, that the actor playing Jean-Luc Picard at this time would ultimately play Professor X, Patrick Stewart, that is. Now, the X-Men office wants to keep the roster of each X-Men team something of a secret in order to surprise the fans. The new X-Men books team will have 6 members, and we can say that it will be a combination of members of the original X-Men. Okay. Jim says, I think having the original X-Men come back was a good idea. It didn't really make any sense for me why X-Factor existed, especially with Xavier back now. It seems more strange that there would be these 2 separate teams when they all knew each other very well and they all share the same mission or dream in life. Furthermore, the villain in the new X-Men's initial storyline will be Magneto, returning to his role as one of the team's greatest antagonists. I think Magneto is the consummate X-Men villain, and I like his old costume, says Jim. I think if lit properly and in the right pose, he can be extremely threatening just standing there. Jim hopes to be revealing new things about both Wolverine and Magneto in upcoming issues of the new series. And indeed we would see that, but this is not the costume Magneto would be wearing in X-Men number 1 to 3. Jim has been participating in plotting the X-Men stories he's worked on for both series to varying degrees, changing with each issue. This is interesting. He and Whilce Portacio, for example, co-plotted the first Savage Land issue with Rogue and Magneto. That's Uncanny X-Men 274. I've had a lot of input on the storyline. Chris has been renowned for letting whoever his artist is have input if he wants input. Some issues that we've done, I'd say we did co-plot. Others, I'd say I had input. Some of the outer space stuff we're doing in Uncanny X-Men, he had a plot, I added stuff, and he reworked it. And so I'd say it's maybe 60 to 7% his and 30 to 40% mine. I think there's some other issues where I felt I had at least 50%. I wonder what those were. There are some issues we plot just by talking together. I think with the new series, both Whilce and I are being encouraged to give as much input as possible, and I think Chris prefers that because it allows him to get feedback on his ideas. Well, we know that Chris didn't prefer it, and so he quit the X-Men and Marvel. So back to the interview though. Jim hopes to help make the new X-Men series as accessible as possible to new readers. What I'd like to see is that any fan out there who hasn't been reading the 270 or 280 odd issues of X-Men that are out there should be able to pick up X-Men number 1 and collect it from that point on and understand it to a large degree. I want allusions to the past and pre-established characters popping in, but I also want to create new continuity from issue 1. I want to clear away some of the plot lines that have been established and strike out into new territory. I also want the stories to have a definite beginning, middle and end. What I'd like to see is 3 or 4 or 5 part stories. These arcs of stories that kind of overlap a little bit, but as soon as we start something, if we set something up, we'll take care of it within 10 issues instead of letting it linger on and on. A little bit of a criticism of Claremont's plotting in the last 3 or 4 years of his work on X-Men there. If we ever do use anything from past issues, there will be a flashback or there will be an expository section in the comic explaining who this character is or how he is related to the X-Men. We want to tie it into X-Men continuity, but at the same time it won't be a requirement that you've read all the other issues. We will explain things as we go along. With Xavier back in charge, Magneto again a villain, and members of the original X-Men back on the team, it may seem at first glance that the 2 X-Men books are going back to the days of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's original X-Men series, but Jim points out that the current X-Men books are very different. Quote, the world has changed, the characters have changed. It's not like we've tried to take the book back 30 years in time. We're seeing the same conflict, but in a different light, in different circumstances. He thinks of the new series as combining the best of the original X-Men with the best of what the X-Men are about nowadays. Jim has other projects in the works too, including penciling, inking and co-plotting with Gregory Wright, a Punisher hardcover graphic novel which should appear later this year. It never did, but there are some pages from it out there on the internet, also featuring Nick Fury. But he plans to remain with these new X-Men series, with the new X-Men series for the foreseeable future. With every book I've done, I like to feel that I put my mark on that book. I'd like to do up to issue 50 of the new series. That's my goal. If I end up doing 25, that'll be good too. but somewhere between 25 and 50. And then he adds laughing, Barry, and nervous breakdown. Well, dear subscriber, he made it to issue 11 before heading out the door to co-found Image Comics. So, but not before selling 8 million copies of X-Men #1. So here's the profile, and this is 1977 rendering of Wolverine by young Jim Lee. So that's pretty cool, and you can see the John Byrne influence there, and that would have been when he was reading the Claremont Byrne comics just about at their beginning. And so here is his Marvel freelance credits: Alpha Flight, Punisher War Journal, Uncanny X-Men. Marvel freelance credits present: X-Men, Punisher, and the Nick Fury graphic novel. Never appeared, of course, sadly. His place of birth: Seoul, South Korea. He went to the States at the age of 5. People who knew me in high school thought I was short. His hobbies are tennis, scuba diving, traveling, and sleeping. Let's see, what else is interesting here? Let's see. I'm not going to touch on everything. The reason he got into comics was... Oh, wait, this is a good bit of information here. His greatest accomplishments: getting married, #1. 2, graduating from Princeton University with a degree in psychology. The reason he got into comics, he didn't want to become a brain surgeon. Now, his biggest influences on his work include my homage boys, Scott Williams, Wills Portacio, Joe Chiodo, Carl Alstadter, also Neil Adams, John Byrne, Kevin Nolan, Mike Mignola, Art Adams, Milo Manara, the Italian artist, and Barry Windsor Smith. The single work of which he's most proud, he's got 3 here: Punisher War Journal #10, Uncanny X-Men 274, it's the one set in Savage Land, and X-Men #1. We've got a page here. I always love this anchor image of Magneto here, this kind of upshot 3/4 profile, stunning work, and it looks so good here. But as soon as I read this, when I got this issue and I found out that he himself was proud of Punisher War Journal #10, I went out and I got that as a back issue, and that's a great issue, inked by Scott Williams. And I have it, and I think I shall review it on the channel in the future. And here we go. His greatest unfulfilled ambition in the comics field: to create a book team which will shape future comics as much as Amazing Fantasy #15 or Uncanny X-Men #94. Well, Wildcats #1 is not that. So Jim Lee yet to fulfill that particular ambition, I think. And then we've got this preview feature on X-Men #1. Great anchor image of Colossus from that issue. Let's see, what else do we have here? We have a little news article about how they're, in celebration of X-Men #1, they are putting out 2 facsimile editions of Uncanny X-Men #1, the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby issue 1 from 1963, and Giant Size X-Men #1. I got the facsimile edition of X-Men #1, Uncanny X-Men #1, and I still have it, and I'm going to do a review of that in the future as well. It's a great little artifact, so you can look forward to that one. Unfortunately, I didn't get this one of Giant Size X-Men #1. I don't ever remember seeing it, but as soon as I saw the #1, X-Men #1, I got that off the racks. Article here on X-Men action figures. You can have a read of that if you want to pause the video and read it. Let's continue. Little Fred Hembeck 2-page story in here to do with the Fantastic Four and the 4 different covers of X-Men #1. You can have a read of that, of course, if you pause the video. Then this is the feature that was trumpeted on the cover. Let's flip back to that. The first Marvel mutant story ever by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko from Amazing Adult Fantasy #15, which with the... Let's have a look at it here. I'll catch it up again. Make sure this is nice and centered for you. And this is it. This is page 1 of it. So Stan talks a little bit about it here and how he'd forgotten about it. Of course, Stan didn't have the world's best memory. But let's take a look at this story. It's only 5 pages. We start with the splash page by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And this is the protagonist, Tad Carter. Yes, Tad Carter really is flying above the city, but that's not the only strange thing about him. Okay, so our attention has been gotten. What next? Perhaps it all started with the big bomb, for Brad Carter was an atomic scientist. During his years of research, his body absorbed small doses of radiation every day, not enough to harm him, but enough to affect his infant son, Tad. But who could have suspected that the seemingly normal baby would grow up to become a mutant? There he is, and he looks a hell of a lot like Peter Parker. And Peter Parker, of course, shows up in the very next issue of Amazing Fantasy, number 15. So there's all kinds of ideas in a particular kind of blend here in this 5-page story. There's origins for X-Men number 1 and origins for Spider-Man. And it's like they have to be separated from each other. And also a little bit of, like almost shades of the Hulk here as well, somewhat. So let's continue with the story. It wasn't until Tad's 12th birthday that he began to realize he was different. So he's able to attract the baseball to his hand. And then here he is in school looking very much like Peter Parker. But the simple incident was soon forgotten. Then a few years later, I can't answer this test question. What's happening? The answers are appearing in my brain. I can see all of them clearly. I actually am reading Filbert's The Professor's Mind. And then he knows what the professor's going to say, so he's got these telepathic powers. He can read anybody's mind. And he says here, what a wonderful thing this will be for humanity, if I can teach others how to do it too. I've got to try. I've got to give this gift to mankind. Noble sentiment. What's going to happen to Tad as soon as he tries? But Tad Carter was soon to learn that mankind was not yet ready for such a gift. So he says here to these guys, look, I'll prove it. I can read your minds. So he says, you're thinking of breaking your date with Lois Brown tonight. It's true. You little sneak, what right do you have to go around poking in our brains? So he grabs him by the lapel and then he says, don't let go. I only want to help you. I can also show you how to move things by the power of thought alone. So he's got telekinetic powers, but the lads conclude the guy's a menace. He's not human, a mutant, that's what he is, a freak. We don't want his kind around here. So they move in to attack him. And he uses his telekinesis to push them away. And then he levitates. And then something is pulling him, a power far greater than his. And he hears a voice in his brain calling, Tad Carter, it is time for you to know the truth. Tad Carter, the truth. So here we get the resolution to everything on the last page. You're not alone. There are many of us, many mutants, as mankind calls us, mutants who have powers that human beings never dreamed of, such as the power to make you fly, though we are far away. So this is the origins of Professor X here, much more wrinkled looking Professor X. We are the next great stage in the development of man. We are the telepaths, the teleporters, the mind readers. We are the future. But why do you keep yourselves hidden? Asked Tad. Because people fear those who are different, and humans try to destroy those whom they fear, just as they tried to destroy you. This is the theme of Lee and Kirby's X-Men. But we can do so much for mankind. We can lead humanity to a new golden era. Why can't they understand? And here we get Stan Lee's kind of humanistic moralizing. They're too savage, too primitive to understand, but we will bring you to us now, and you will wait with us. We shall wait together until the world is ready to welcome us. We shall wait in hiding until that fateful day when mankind comes of age. The end. But it would be picked up again, 1963, X-Men number 1. So here we go. A little feature on a Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Something about Marvel editors trading cards. Some of these look pretty cool. And this was a way of seeing what some of these names looked like, if even in cartoon fashion. Not Terry Kavanagh though, such a smoker as he. Here's Fabian Nicieza, looking a little bit like a version of Christopher Reeve. Marvel Age of Comics, a history of Marvel Comics in 1984. What I was interested in on these pages was to do with Transformers. And they just had a couple of lines, actually just one sentence about Transformers. That was the property I was interested in. A lot of this about Star Wars, G.I. Joe, ROM. Marvel Comics price guide. So Transformers number 1 in mint was going for $3.50 in 1991. Issue number 2 for $2. Great prices. And then they had a letters page at the back. This is John Byrne's Fantastic Four here. Let's see. And then the answers to, here's the answers to the X-Men trivia quiz from earlier, if you're interested in that. Pen pals down here. This is a great ad here using Art Adams' Ghost Rider. Pretty cool. So there you go on the back. Just give you a little look at that. 1991 Marvel Age calendar for the month of August. So you've got different people's birthdays here. Terry Austin, 23rd of August. John Romita Sr. on the 17th of August, and so on and so forth. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Marvel Age number 104, the Jim Lee special, and with that bonus feature of the first Marvel mutant story ever by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, with shades of Spider-Man and X-Men blended into it. If you like this video, please do so. Please like it in YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.